Welcome back to The Line now as we continue counting down the top stories of the year. Coming in at number 8 on our non-scientific list is the local impacts of Texas's historic abortion ban. The U.S. Supreme Court recently upheld that law, which effectively restricts abortions after about 6 weeks from conception. The justices did say that legal challenges to that law can continue. And Algernon, there is no way New Mexico won't feel the impacts of that law as women flock to the land of enchantment for service. But how sustainable is that long term?
Well, it's not as though we have a whole lot of centers in New Mexico to accommodate that need. And so, although New Mexico did take the step preemptively of repealing a statutory abortion ban in our state, if people are coming to New Mexico from Texas for services, you might see wait times, and you might see a problem, an obstacle to other women's healthcare services as well.
Jessica, down your part of the world, of course, where you are, I mean, Planned Parenthood says there are 55,000 abortions in Texas annually, and New Mexicans can't possibly absorb that kind of, number. I mean, are you seeing things already? What's your reporting telling you?
Well, let me just start by saying that the resources in New Mexico are not very huge for this type of service for women, right? If we're talking about southern New Mexico, they don't exist here at all, really. You're looking at services offered in urban areas like Albuquerque and Bernalillo County. So the impact would further be seen in northern New Mexico than this part of the state. But we are closer to Texas, so we hear a lot of the conversations and a lot of the concerns. And to answer your question, I don't think with the resources that we have on hand that we will be able to, as you said, absorb that need. But I do think that it's maybe an opportunity to start that conversation about how we can improve those services or begin to offer more expansive ones.
Julianne, I got a tough question, and others may want to get in on this too. Is the reversal of Roe v. Wade almost inevitable at this point, as some people have suggested, not me, considering the current makeup of the U.S. Supreme Court? And what would the impacts be on New Mexico?
I mean, I'm not a Supreme Court scholar. I would say as a woman in New Mexico, an American woman, a woman of the planet Earth, that we need to maintain reproductive freedom and healthcare access for women everywhere. I have to say that what Algernon brought up, the New Mexico statutory ban that was on the books, was a really important change for advocates who are concerned that the federal law might make New Mexico's law actually a factor. And so, they worked for a long time to get that repealed. And there were some changes in the makeup of the legislative bodies, particularly the Senate, that, made that possible during this past legislative session. I mean, I think that it is, uncontestably true that New Mexico's healthcare system is beleaguered on all fronts. That includes healthcare for women, that includes abortion services, and that includes birth control access, especially in rural areas, like Jessica pointed out. But even in Santa Fe, even before this happened, there were women who had to travel from Santa Fe to Albuquerque to get these services. And so you can imagine that with all the women that are coming from Texas, and this is not an if scenario. This is a when, this is a happening right now scenario. In order for women to get those services, they have to cross the state lines, and our state line is the line that they're crossing.
Dan, same question, Roe v. Wade, and maybe some things I'm interested you might be hearing about this. Some folks, who are very against Roe v. Wade, of course, are seeing this as an opportunity. What's your reporting telling you what's happening in Santa Fe and Albuquerque?
Well, New Mexico does not have very strict abortion restrictions. Services are limited by other factors, kind of the broader healthcare system here kind of being overwhelmed. But it certainly looks important that criminal statute was repealed, given the potential changes at the federal level. That certainly could have a real practical impact. It wasn't just a theoretical debate. As Julianne mentioned, it has already changed the legislature. An initial push to repeal that criminal abortion statute failed, and a bunch of legislators they lost their reelection bids. So it's already changed the legislature itself. House Republicans in particular have still pushed for more stringent abortion restrictions. And they are just heavily outnumbered, and it's difficult to see any of that advancing unless there's some sort of cataclysmic event in local politics that changes the numbers of the legislature.
Mm-hmm. Algernon, of course, in southern New Mexico, it's a little more conservative in general terms on these things, but in Las Cruces, where you are, may not be directly applicable. You, of course, you're a college town. But I'm curious what you're sensing from folks in your part of the state on the idea of abortions. Just period. If somebody wanted to open an abortion clinic in Las Cruces, could they have success with it, or would it be open up a real hornet's nest?
Well, I mean, there would certainly be some public comment, but there would also be a lot of support for a facility that would provide services at a time when there's just not enough. There aren't enough providers. And again, it's not just aborting pregnancies. It's also birth control and other healthcare services, and as well as counseling and referrals to financial assistance. These are some of the reasons that women seek abortions, is because of their financial circumstances or other circumstances. So, I mean, there would certainly be opposition. There would probably be people waving signs. There would certainly be a lot of dialogue and comment about that. But at least in the Las Cruces area, the Doña Ana County area, where we are bordering Texas, I think that's certainly a possibility. The limits would probably be more infrastructural, financial, and also just the lack of providers in general, physicians, nurses, and other medical professionals in the state, especially as long as the COVID-19 emergency persists.
It's a difficulty for providers to get into that, into the medical world. I appreciate you pointing that out. Jessica, we'll finish with you. Could an abortion clinic be open in Carlsbad and not be an amazing controversy to help absorb some of these things?
Well, let me share just a story that we reported on earlier in this controversy. There was a local doctor a woman's doctor who was providing just advice about how to seek abortions. And she was effectively marched to the border of the county with a thank you, but no thank you.
Wow.
So we are in a very conservative part of the state. And I think that you will see that play a major factor in whether those type of services are offered here. Now, I will add to that by saying I think that this has been an issue that has given a lot of people room to speak up. So those who normally would stay quiet about their support for expanding those types of services here are speaking up. We saw a lot of women's marches in southern New Mexico accompanying this, following Texas's abortion bill. And we saw that in Carlsbad as much as we did in other rural communities surrounding us. So I think that while we might not embrace it, that there are definitely those voices out there who are getting louder about being able to voice their opinion on this.
New Mexico's own Deb Haaland comes in at number 7 on our list after becoming the first ever Native American cabinet secretary. President Joe Biden appointed her as Secretary of the Department of the Interior. And Jessica, staying with you, she has really wasted no time in showing the impact a Native voice can have on federal policy.
That is correct. So we saw her do some pretty, strong moves in her first months in office. Chaco Canyon, the protections laid on top of that historic site. It's a 20-year moratorium on oil and gas exploration. A lot of controversy surrounding that. But I think that when it comes to the secretary, a lot of people are excited to see what else she will do, just as a woman of Native American heritage and a woman in the cabinet.
Julianne, place names get a lot of attention, and it's very interesting, the power of a name. I'm curious your thoughts on the Secretary's attack, her approach, and what she wants to go after with this position.
I mean, I think one of the things that people are the most proud of Deb about is her advocacy on behalf of voices that perhaps have not been amplified to the degree, and there's no perhaps about it. It's that she is an advocate for voices that have not been amplified to the degree that they deserve. And she promised to be fierce for all New Mexicans, and in fact, for all Americans. And I think that her saying like this is not about politically correct language. This is about, moral identification. This is a serious matter. It's not okay to use these slurs that refer to, the female anatomy and other things. And I'm really proud of Deb. And I think a lot of New Mexicans are proud and just agree. Can't wait to see what else she's going to do. In addition to running the Boston Marathon in a ribbon skirt.
I forgot about that. That's right. She was terrific on that. Hey, Dan, boarding schools is obviously an issue going across North America, meaning the U.S. and Canada, but right here in Albuquerque and around New Mexico as well. It's almost like she's the perfect cabinet secretary at the perfect time. The timing could not be better to push these issues forward.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting to have such a prominent New Mexican playing a role in all of these sort of national and international debates. She really has emerged as an important political voice in New Mexico and voice for communities that a lot of people probably don't think about, especially in other parts of the country. I know that her election just to Congress, not to mention her appointment as a cabinet secretary, I have talked to people who, they're just, in tears seeing someone who looks like them, speaks indigenous languages, has ascended to that level. And, she's really become an important voice on all kinds of issues just beyond the Interior Department.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Algernon, what kind of bump do we get here in New Mexico with this appointment? Could she have perhaps done more, as Dan mentioned, as a member of the U.S. House, or are we better off here as a state with this position?
I think it is a unique opportunity that we have someone from New Mexico where we are such a diverse state and we have so many, native peoples here. To have someone in this position, the Interior is a cabinet position that arguably has a lot of power and influence relative to other cabinet positions. Mm-hmm. You have somebody who not only has the background she has as a Native American, but also this working class background. This is a mom who has struggled with student loan payments and trying to make ends meet. And then she is elevated to this position of power. So I think the representation of her economic background as well as her ethnic background really matters. And also, frankly, the work that she's doing around names and language generally and telling our history matters. It's not just symbolic. I interviewed at one point a Native American leader from New Mexico's Arenas Valley, and he said something really interesting. We were talking about we have landmarks named after Confederate heroes. We have, Baylor Canyon and other names that are kind of repugnant for people who are steeped in this history. And he said that he thinks that Americans generally may have forgotten the power of language and what is brought into being by the way we name things and the way we construct our stories. And I think that this is just a really unique contribution that a New Mexican citizen can make. And so that doesn't necessarily put anything in our pocketbook, but I think morally and historically, I think it really puts us in a prominent place to help improve the country. Mm-hmm.
Well said, Algernon. I love that. Jessica, is there, in your part of the world, oil and gas is obviously going to be a potential point of conflict with the Secretary of the Interior. What's happening down there? Is she persona non grata at this point? Are people just sort of waiting to see? What's your sense of it?
I think you put it perfectly. People are waiting to see. Now, we understand that with her appointment to this administration, an administration that has been very upfront about their move toward renewables and away from fossil fuels, that there is an expectation that she will be bringing that message strongly across the U.S. and specifically to the Permian Basin, our oil and gas producing region here in New Mexico. But there is still a lot of wait and see, because there are questions about how do you honor the what's best for the nation in terms of economy and growth, while also pushing while also asking the nation to accept this move toward this green energy, new climate change, environmental protections.
Sure.
All around. So we are just kind of biding our time and hoping that there will be an equitable path forward for both the industry and for the nation.
Julianne, New Mexicans faced a rare special election to replace Ms. Holland in the U.S. House. Democrat Melanie Stansbury, of course, won that race handily over Republican state lawmaker Mark Morris. Does that election solidify Democrats' hold over that seat in next year's crucial midterm elections?
I mean, will redistricting play a role in that? To ask a question, back to you. I know that we're going to talk about redistricting a little bit later, but really, I think that we're going to be in it looks like anyway, if all this gets signed by the governor, we'll be in a situation where we have a congressional districts that are different from any that we've seen in New Mexico in recent history. I do think that, similarly to the exercise that Algernon just participated in, and of are we better with Deb Haaland as Secretary of Interior versus a member of Congress? I think you can have that same conversation of like, are we better with Melanie Stansbury at Congress versus being at the Roundhouse? And I think we lost a strong advocate for water and somebody who could have been really a rising leader for state Dems, going to Washington. So I think that's a consideration also worth a few minutes.
Dan, I got to get you in on this one. Political shifting ground is pretty common, of course, but CD1 has been a traditionally very safe Democrat seat, even with Republicans being elected, in that district. They were sort of, not so hardcore. How do you see the future of this district? I couldn't imagine it flipping red at any point, but in our politics right now, you never know.
Yeah, one of the interesting things is, the first congressional district has been an Albuquerque-based district, and if the redistricting proposal holds, it will now include, a lot of rural counties, not just the East Mountains, but stretch all the way down toward the southeast, although not quite into the oil patch. And so that will give Stansbury or whoever is running for the seat kind of a broader constituency, maybe. It may not be quite so Albuquerque focused. There may be some more debate about agricultural issues and things like that. It is a little too early to say about the political environment. We'll have to see if these maps get signed into law and who emerges to challenge her. But I think she certainly will have some different constituencies to answer to.
That's all the time we have for now. When we come back to the line, it's our 6th biggest story of 2021.